will spin. The propaganda's a win, stress feeding on my tension. My countrymen, they love their fiction. Words upon now, it's made with good intentions.
Welcome to 1 200, the Media and Politics podcast, coming to you from Aotearoa. I'm joined by my co-host Simone. How you doing?
Hello, I'm well. It's foggy here instead of sunny, so summer is over.
That's
Autumn
exciting.
is done.
I haven't
For
really had
the
a fog
American
here
audiences, that's fall, leaf fall down. Yeah.
yet. Oh, our wide-ranging American audience.
I just opened up Radio New Zealand, and the top headline at the moment is Common Ground for National and Labour Analysis.
So this is what I was talking about before the pod. Let's kick off with that, eh? So
Beautiful.
the Labour Party did a little reshuffle. It was a little economic reshuffle of the broad economic portfolios, and it was to focus on economic growth or some dumb shit. The really frustrating thing here is that this seems to be the first salvo by the Labour Party for beginning their 2026 election campaign. And similarly to 2023, which Chris Hipkins horribly lost as leader, they decided to give it to Auckland businesses. And I don't know, like even in 2023, when there was like discussion about cost of living was beginning, it's basically what National Road to Power on was saying they're going to help solve it because people are so desperate. And Labour pivoted rightwards and like started trying to suck up to business interests instead of, going all in for their core constituency, workers. And after 18 months, just over 18 months, I guess, of this national coalition government, things are much, much, much worse. It is concerning to me that Labour is focusing, or at least pitching, its economic vision to businesses first. Chris Evans is doing a State of the Nation, and it is with the Auckland Chamber of Commerce. One would think there might be other people who would be the target audience for this. What are your feelings about it? I don't like, you can have feelings about that, but I think we agree on this, right? Like it's not even what we call a bad look. It's incredibly bad strategically.
If anybody, reads the news or pays attention to it, I suppose. I'm not sure how much Labour's base does that. I imagine that a lot of the older people do. That must be true. It's difficult. There's not that much to say about this. I think, the rhetorical question that you raised, about it. Labour, who could they be talking to instead? Well, Labour, right? As in the labor of the country, not capital, not business. But that's what Labour's been like since the 80s. And there's nothing more to say about that. I think the language that Hipkins expressed is concerning. It's concerning that Hipkins has stayed on as leader, for starters, especially having no vision. If what he'd said was, look, we lost, but we have the next 3 years to sell New Zealand on what Labour wants to do, and it's the same as it was in 2023, but we're going to spend time working at public opinion because we know that it's the right thing to do. We know this is right. That would be a different situation. In this case, it's the student career politician who just wants a shot at the big boy chair again for his own personal sake. And that is concerning. It's concerning that nobody in Labour has had the guts to try to overthrow him. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that there's inner turmoil because they're all a little ego-driven, right? But it's just weird because when I talk to people just kind of out and about or in wider circles and stuff, one thing that people who are, interested in quote unquote politics, because a lot of people just aren't, is, well, who else is there in Labour? And the answer is, I guess we don't get to know. Because if there are such people, they don't really sort of rear their heads very much. And I'm sure close analysts would be able to, or, armchair people who treat it sort of like sports and they know all the different members of the teams and such, would be able to talk about that. But to the ordinary person, the household names, I suppose, who are those? That's kind of difficult. And I do understand it from that position, albeit I'm not sure that Chris Hipkins has that kind of appearance or branding or whatever it is either. Assuming that we're taking the cynical optics-based view of horse race politics, yeah. If we're talking substantively, then this is more of the same as the budget responsibility rules, saying I've tasked Barbara with making sure we're ready to balance the books, increase our savings, expand our investment opportunities, and create the economic conditions for all Kiwis to thrive. I love when he uses the racialized language of Kiwis, S plural, by the way. Like, it makes me feel so good when politicians do that, when they do the code word for Pākehā who don't know that Kiwi is a Māori word. We love that. We really like that. It's so enjoyable to me to use the word Kiwis.
It's yeah.
Sorry, no. Please chime in. This is a two-hander,
It's so
so
frustrating.
we've got a
Yeah.
riff, right? Like,
It's so frustrating just to see it fumbled immediately again, right? Like you say like, oh, where Labour could run on some of the same stuff it ran on last time, but what was that, right? Like Hipkins is not even able to say that because when Hipkins first became Prime Minister, when Ardern left in 2023, his instinct was to just cut a bunch of stuff up. It was to like just their PR was about doing a policy bonfire. Like they led that. That was they leaned into it. Was we're actually going to do nothing. We're gonna not only we're going to do nothing. The things we were going to do, we're going to do less. We're going to intentionally destroy because they had this absurd idea that it was what was being done by the Labour government that was the problem, what that was driving votes away, and not the fact they weren't doing enough. That the cost of living crunch had become untenable to the extent that people were looking across the aisle and saying, at least National are lying to us, right? There were so many ways for Labour to lie. They could have just said we're going to give everyone $500. National are going to say they're going to give people $200. Outright lie, later proven by Craig Rennie, and said, okay, we'll double that. We'll change the tax rules to double that. Everyone's going to get even more money from us because we care about the workers more, right? Like that is the cynical thing to do. But instead they're like, well, I guess we're just going to have to let them get away with it. And what are we going to do? I guess GST or fruit and vegetables, which we can't even tell you how we're going to implement effectively. And then we're going to get rid of half a dozen policies which were kind of core to our project, and we're not going to get fair pay agreements across the line in time. Whoops, you know? So to come back
people love it
and
when you hold not voting for them for you as a threat over them. Like, oh, you better vote for us or no fair pay agreements. Like, people love that, by the way. They really like when you haven't already materially improved their circumstances.
yeah. And also when no one knows what you're talking about because you've barely PR'd it to the wider public. Like it's not comparable to Democrats trying to hold abortion rights over their voters, right? Like not even on that level of brute cynicism around voting trends. It's just, hey, here's a thing no one really understands because you haven't really communicated effectively to the public. It will make a significant difference, and if you don't vote for us, you won't get it. And everyone's like, okay, we're getting promised money in the back pocket. Like, come on. But to take that approach and move into campaign mode, doing essentially the same thing, targeted at business interests, is it's all the things we hoped wouldn't happen. My favorite second part of this is that they didn't even have a key policy to go to be like, hey, state of a nation, and here's one fucking cool policy that we're going to be fucking grinding on for the next 18 months. Instead, it was Labour will start making policy announcements this year.
It's funny. I talk to people who are I don't know about across the political spectrum, but they're like a lot of them are apolitical or they're like not really leftist or whatever it is. And one thing that comes up, and this is so strange because it's not in the national conversation at all, is oh, our rail infrastructure sucks. Oh, it sucks that we've got roadworks all the time because the trucks are always driving on the motorways. And you're like, huh, if only you could have like a policy, like a Ministry of Works or something, or a nationalized rail to kind of like
People
do
want
this.
today. People
It's
really want
weird
it.
that that's something that it's funny because that's not like one that's led by the opinion leaders in the papers or anything like that. That's just something that people are kind of slowly becoming aware of, I think.
Yeah,
It's
and with
curious.
with
Anyway,
CRL opening in Auckland pretty soon,
yeah.
that'll become more apparent that the rest of the network isn't there, I think. Which is, yeah, you'd think someone would be ready to go. Like it would make a bunch of jobs, it would get pressure off the roads, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But instead, nothing there. I
The $200 thing is really funny because it's like there was it's a statistical error. Average person got no dollars or
yeah.
negative dollars, but landlord's Georg got 3 billion.
It's
Such a good. I mean, I actually do want to break down what Chris Hipkins said
yeah, get
if the indulgence is okay. But like he says, we're ready to balance the books. Okay, concerning language, austerity language, the notion of a government balancing its books is a kind of myth, right? And the kind of unorthodox or heterodox, I suppose we could politely call them, like kind of MMT weirdos. People are sort of obsessed with that idea or whatever it is.
You're all cool with
Not
us. That's fine. Go hard.
I no, I don't think that this is like the worst kind of. It's not like Austrian economics, which is total fantasy, or anything like that, or like neoliberalism, which is just like off the wall out of Neptune or something, like no bearing on reality. I mean, politely speaking, if you're America, there is a lot of truth to that, right? Because you control the world's economy and monetary policy by everybody pegging it to your currency and that. But and the petrodollar. But I think for other people, it's a little more nuanced, a little more complicated. But broadly speaking, the way that a fiat currency, they kind of feel mostly right? In the broad sense. And there are other levers which you have to be aware of, and other factors which you have to be kind of watching. But a lot of the more nuanced thinkers are quite aware of that. I think Hudson's a good one. And when looking at that sort of thing, like this idea of balancing the books, I think that and they're not the only ones. Like Marxist economists will point this out as well. But MMT people are probably the ones that are most available to the limelight for people to ordinarily listen to, and not totally shut out of every conversation like anybody to the left. They're correct. The balancing the books is just nonsense, right? Like, this isn't how it works. It's not a household budget. You don't have that. The government exists in concert with the private sector. And if government is not taking on debt, then the private sector is doing that as a response. All the country's falling into disrepair, like one of those three, right? Like it's got to be a kind of balance in that sense, because it acts wider. And yes, like the private sector does kind of create currency through like, banks, fractional reserve lending, and so on and so forth. But just kind of focusing on government, like taxation is about minusing rather than adding, really. And if you are a government, what you are focused on is the future. So like the debt that you are taking on is, okay, we're going to have an increased population, or we're going to have, growth in this sector, or this is going to change in the future. And therefore, what we're doing now is using our debt to create that kind of future. And then that will stimulate action and movement in the economy at those times, or will create the capacity where we're able to actually function as a society, right? All of this is necessary. And New Zealand has, and many people keep on saying this, albeit not everybody who is allowed into the mainstream, that New Zealand has a very low debt to GDP ratio in the OECD, like remarkably low. And what that is doing is shortchanging the future. That's been going on for long enough now that we're seeing the effects. Like everything that you see in Wellington, for example, with like the water pipes and sewage going everywhere and that, this is an example in miniature with the council. But over the whole country, this is the case as well.
So we have no rail.
I think the Fulton Hogan story is quite indicative that the whole tendering process, or this, the vast kind of private parasitism of putting public money out for private companies to then bid the lowest and then do a shittier job with, while creaming off the top and taking no risk with that. That whole scam or grift that exists throughout the entirety of New Zealand's infrastructure, or the way our power companies work, right? Which aren't really kept. They don't do anything. They're just selling you. They're just a middleman taking out the money. All of that, right? This country's economy just being grifts upon grifts upon grifts, that causes decline, that just causes collapse slowly over time, because the country's getting bigger and there are newer challenges in the future as climate change comes, as it's already started having effects and will compound in the future. And yet nothing's being done. They're sort of selling the copper wiring out of the walls. this is nonsensical as an approach. And the fact that we have two parties that agree on it, the two biggest parties agree on this, and Hipkins agrees with that and wants to sell the mythology to people, almost certainly knowing that this is false, right? Like he must know and be aware, having been in government, that that is not the way that the economy works. The fact that he would lie to people like this to sell austerity is just concerning. So that's just the balancing the books mythology, right? Increasing our savings, again, saying we're not going to go into debt, or not into debt, I should say. We're not going to take on debt as a government to then fund the future that will then like redound back to this country and a society that lives, within these borders. Instead, we're going to quote unquote increase our savings, something which just like doesn't even make sense on a government level. All that means is cutting, right? You hear government talk about savings. What that means is you will feel more pain in your life personally.
And how does it even work after what the national government has been doing for the last 18 months, right? Like, what else is there to cut? Like, it's already immensely destructive.
Yeah. Because if you were to reset this, if you were to say, oh, yes, we're going to increase our savings by, taking away what they've given to landlords. Here's the thing. I'm not sure that that on its own would work to reverse this country's economic reliance on landlord parasitism and the whole settings of the economy based around property speculation and around rentier takings. You would have to spend money to reconfigure the economy. So in the short term, you can't, like, especially within the 3-year period, you're not generating savings. In the long term, it's going to be much better. But that's not the case. That's not what's going to happen immediately. So you're lying. Like, somebody is lying here, right? Unless the idea is, actually, we agree that we're going to totally remove social security from existence, like the entire welfare state, we're going to go further than national. If that's the case, and again, in the long term, that wouldn't save more because you just end up putting more money into, say, like, the prison system or something to make up for all of the shoplifting, then ta-da, like you haven't really made savings at all. It doesn't work like that. Nothing makes sense about this. Again, as expand our investment opportunities, just bland, just the idea of like, yes, we're opening up our country to be like run by billionaires. This whole, national having its policy of like, oh, the Peter Thiel citizenship thing. Like, what if we just like did that for, lower the bar for that a little bit?
It was under Labour that we made the BlackRock deal, right?
Yeah. And that's something that people haven't talked about very much at all since,
because
even at the time, lost, right? Yes. Yeah. And this last bit, this is something that I think won't get picked up on necessarily, is create the economic conditions for all Kiwis to thrive. Setting aside that kind of racialized term, the whiteness of Kiwis or whatever it is, all New Zealanders, like let's take that as an example. This is a country necessarily at class war with other sectors. Like the ruling class isn't at class war with the poorer people, with the people who don't run or own the economy, right? What do you mean all? It's impossible to represent all the interests. So what they really mean by that is that the existing people whose business interest is the national interest, for those people, they will work.
But it's getting given to a business audience. Like, it's hard to consider that otherwise, right?
Yes, and understanding the coded phrasing of it. Because people who are somehow are dispossessed or are indigent or in some way marginal, right, within the society, or are not dominating it, let's say, they're not people to politicians. There are, MPs and parties who I think really do see that. And, a lot of Green MPs are great about that. So Party Māori is sort of a given, like how much that sort of connection to like local politics in each area, local Indigenous politics. But generally speaking, if you're in one of the big parties, like the ants, then they're unpeople, They're things to move around on the spreadsheet to end up funneling the value that they create towards the economic owners, the people at the commanding heights of the economy.
Yeah,
there's no other way to read that.
It's a shame as well because, like, I guess in the rest of the speech, he goes on to talk about what National has done to the country, right? And this is really good copy to use in an election because of just how fucked National has left a lot of people in this country. But to then turn around and say, this is what we have to offer, and it's just this pep, is not going to get you anywhere. There's one thing that, like, I think has been taken out of a little bit of context. And I was mentioning this before we started recording, which is he promised the future Labour government wouldn't spend its first year in power pausing, cancelling, and reviewing everything. And said just because the current government started something, we aren't going to stop it because it was their idea, not ours. And that's really worrying language. I think he was specifically talking about infrastructure, though, which, I tend
Mm.
to agree with. Like, this has been a trend, especially of the national government, to renege on bipartisan promises around development and, cancel stuff just because it's Labour's project. So saying there will be continuity of development under Labour is good, but the way it's being picked up, and this is a comms failure, even if it isn't a policy failure necessarily, is that it looks like, say, Labour saying that they are going to continue with the new school lunch program. He just listed all this garbage that National has done and saying we're not going to cancel any of it, right? Like, which, come on, like. You look like the worst centrist imaginable, and maybe Hipkins is, but you'd have thought someone in his speech writing or someone in his like polling team or whatever the fuck he uses to decide what he's going to let come out of his mouth would have caught this and said, we actually can't say that, given that the entirety of our platform is going to be attacking the national government's current policies.
Well,
Um,
every centrist is the worst centrist imaginable.
Oh yeah, I mean, the number one thing that concerns me here, and predicted by us, I gotta say it, this is exactly what the kind of approach we expected, given that Chris Hipkins went over to the UK to ask Keir Starmer's team how he should run a Labour Party. I'm waiting for the anti-trans turn, essentially, at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, really, really concerning direction, in my opinion. I hope not. And look, there are some good people in Labour who would be pretty angry about it. That's the kind of thing that could get Hipkins rolled. However, this kind of rank centrism is pure third way, modern day third way Labour stuff.
Yeah, I don't want to belabor the point too much. I think you've hit it on the head. This nail of ours, la nail nostra. But him saying I don't know, the language is just it's nonsensical. Like you said, they didn't have any policies to announce from the get-go. They didn't even have anything broad to kind of saying the Luxon government does not have a vision or a plan for New Zealand. Buzzwords and corporate waffle will not lift our income. Like,
we're going to balance the books.
for buzzwords and corporate waffle, and then saying and then saying quite literally they would provide quote hope and action. Motherfucker, what are you doing?
Yeah. This is why you have to have one policy, right?
Because they would get cracking on new policy. Why do you not have it already? Politics at its best changes lives. It lifts people up. It unites hope and action to build the future we all want that works for all of us. One, not possible because there are some people who are trying to kill us and the planet. So it can't
You're not in the West
Wing,
Wing, bro.
But saying, oh, Luxon has all these buzzwords and corporate waffle, and then being like, corporate waffle, bad. West Wing Sorkin waffle, now
good.
that's the stuff.
Yeah. And people are so divorced from this now. I just don't grasp how they have become so cloistered and don't understand that they have.
Have you seen that really? I mean, I don't know if you've seen the episode, but you're aware that there's this episode of The West Wing where there's just this really embarrassingly terrible scene where the Jeb or whatever his name is, who's the president, is in a cathedral and there's a hurricane outside, and then he's complaining to God in Latin, and he's talking about how I've been your good servant, I balanced the budget, I created 6 million new jobs. That's almost word for word what Hipkins is saying they're gonna do. This is fuck ass speech from nerd president funny. Jeb or whatever.
All right, enough about Labour.
It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful.
I hope Labour do better, but I'm not expecting it at this point. It was an embarrassing start, embarrassing decisions, embarrassing decision with who to pitch it to, embarrassing lack of policy. Just have one policy, even if you don't have the full numbers. Just be and we're gonna give you $200, right? Or we're gonna give you a new set of teeth. I don't give a shit what it is. It could have been anything.
Free dental, come on.
It could have been anything to prove that there is hope in politics, and instead you chose not to do that. Terrible. Reshuffles suck. No one understands. No one cares about it. Yada yada yada. And yet we come back to the fact that this current government is fucked. It is so evil. Latest on school lunches, which have been a weekly appearance in this podcast. A child tried to open a superheated lunch and it squirted hot oil and food onto their leg and gave him second-degree burns.
Yeah.
And RNZ ran a story saying David Seymour apologizes as the pitch.
Yep, that was their headline. Seymour
Like,
apologizes. And then the story made it seem like, oh, he didn't really have to do that. It's not like it's his fault. You're like, sorry?
it's absurd. The hard shift. Like, there was plausible deniability before.
I just want to point out, like, this has made the news, right? But
Oh yeah, this is being in the news every day.
Right, but the apology was he called a student to apologize. How did
No,
the
he called
news
the principal.
He called the principal, sorry. Like, it's just like very obviously a calculator. Like they must have tipped them off, right? Like they must have said, "Oh, by the way, he's apologizing." Like, surely. So how cynical is that as well? And how is that not something that people pick up on or realize that they're getting played about?
No, and this is what I mean. Like, I mean, a bunch of reporters are stupid, right? Like, that's fine, but they're not like they know how this shit works. Like, they know what they're doing when they run these stories with pro act framing, right? Like, they understand that. Like, other stories have been covering like how destitute these lunches are. There's been some really good coverage of it, and it's because it's that bad. And then every so often, and particularly at RNZ, they'll run a story like, "Oh, but David Seymour's doing all this stuff. Oh, but like he's really sorry about it. David,
teething pains.
yeah, teething problems. David Seymour says that he's actually got letters from some schools that say they like it.
David Seymour says actually it's his birthday and he's a super special little boy, and Mummy says you can't make fun of him.
It's actually horrific. And please, New Zealand media, have some self-respect. Like it's.
Let's be real, Kyle. What is there to respect?
I don't. Yeah, it's embarrassing. But I mean,
have some self-respect. Lie to yourself.
At the same time, and this is another thing where specifically RNZ, this just sucks. Even national broadcaster, they should be so much better than this. But they're just completely bought, it feels like at this point. I'm not saying like with fucking money, but like with cultural capital or whatever. I don't know.
Well, in some senses, like with the NZME moves, literally.
So also this week, like another thing which RNZ just failed to report on effectively is that Eric Stanford, who is the Minister for Education, right? David Seymour was the Associate Minister, tried to call David Seymour into a please explain meeting around school lunches. And, maybe it was a regular meeting, maybe it wasn't, but there is clearly a need for David Seymour to explain what is happening with his school lunch program. I want to be very clear about this. The media itself trumpeted David Seymour as saving school lunches for like 2 months straight. They went and like gobbled down the fucking PR school lunches from the trough, and everyone talked, "Oh, these are actually really good. They really are going to be able to do it for cheaper, at the same or better quality." Everyone bought it. Obviously, hasn't come to pass, right? Like it's not being delivered. When it is delivered, it puts people in the emergency room or feeds them burnt plastic, right? Like that is very clearly, this is a failed policy, a failed implementation. It is fair for the minister to ask the associate minister who delivered this for a please explain. And oops, the ACT caucus ran over and he couldn't make it to the meeting. And as far as we know, there still has not been a meeting about this between the Minister for Education and the Associate Minister who implemented this. And RNZ said, it's Eric Stanford's fault, actually, for I don't know why.
Scheduling a meeting on his birthday.
Oh,
we've been over this.
Birthday.
This is a beautiful birthday boy. He's a special boy. And he needs care and attention.
It was essentially the Minister of Education is trying to play politics with this. Like, are you fucking kidding? I mean, of course.
The government is trying to play politics.
Why are so many journos,
they listen to
so many
themselves?
people in the political gallery going into bat for David Seymour when
he can't be a good hang? It's not that.
It's wild.
David Seymour comes around for your Settlers of Catan night. Like, no, that would be a terrible ordeal.
Just horrific. And
He's going to start talking about the non-aggression principle and why you can't sell him 2 wool for 3 sheep. Look, yeah, this is the thing as well, is he's always got time for, whatever podunk student radio station or whatever.
Or
But
like
okay,
what
bad analogy, because
American
those are like young
podcaster,
people,
right?
and he wants to be around young people very much, a
Someone sent him a
lot, all of the
Snapchat
time.
like, "Hey, David, come on
But
my."
what I'm saying is he'll give a comment on any story, anytime, anywhere, whatever it is, right? Like that's how he cultivated
Which
these
is
relationships with
given
reporters.
as the reason why media are forced to always run his PR, right? Like,
He must be, yeah, like he's definitely getting so much work. Like, how is this not a situation where they say, oh, clearly, evidently, there are concerns because he's not doing his job. His job as an associate minister is to answer and report to the minister, right? Wait, he's in cabinet, isn't he? He has responsibilities and rules that are set out, like constitutional responsibilities to answer for what's going on. Yeah. I'm not sure if he's in cabinet in respect of that portfolio. I think it's the Ministry of Regulation. But in any case, like he's part of the inner circle, right? He's deputy prime minister at the moment, isn't that right? Has he switched over yet?
he hasn't switched over yet, but he has been acting prime minister and deputy while the others have been out of the country or whatever.
Right. So he has these responsibilities, right? And according to norms, he really ought to be doing his job. This is part of his job description. Why is it in the story not David Seymour doesn't do job, instead just lounges around and talks to reporters at every opportunity? Clearly, he can't do one or the other. This is like how people say, "Oh, Elon Musk is clearly like working so hard being CEO of 3 companies." It's like if you look at his tweeting pattern, he's just tweeting all the time. He's not doing any work. Like he's constantly tweeting. So the same must be true of Seymour. You must say, like, look, he's always giving a comment to this or that news person on any given story, and he's welching on meetings in his actual job. This is a layabout parasite taking public money in his salary. He's not doing anything. It's all self-aggrandizing. That has to be the news story, and you can frame it in more docile terms if you want, but that should be the story. Man's not doing his job.
Man's not doing his job. Children, second degree burns.
Suffering
Right?
as a result, physically suffering as a result.
Yeah.
I
You,
mean,
you would think. You would
social
think.
burns instead of social murder. Damn, that fucking poor kid, like all these poor children. It's just, I don't
Well, and
know.
then
I know that we use them as that people, they get sort of used as a political football because we love in this country to say, well, children are uncomplicated moral subjects, whereas
yeah,
adults are deserving of the suffering that they get by losing their job and being poor or whatever it is. But like realistically, yeah, we're losing even that kind of norm because there are sock puppet accounts online now whose Hasbara line at the moment, the propaganda line is, oh, well, it's the parents' responsibility to feed them. Okay, how are the children supposed to enforce that? They're children. They're not
it's pretty foul.
culpable.
It is pretty foul. And then RNZ again, with their education correspondent, trotting out this principal who's saying like, oh, these other schools are complaining, bring those lunches to us. Like this is incredibly classic, like divide and conquer shit. And our journalists at the national broadcaster are going out of their way to pitch this PR forward. This is pro-government propaganda. There's no other word for this kind of shit.
Wait, a splinter within the government. This is, if you were to take the American equivalent, this is pro
Absolutely.
Tea Party propaganda,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
This the splinter of the government which is attempting to take over ideologically and become the dominant strain within national, you know, because they know
It's
that ACT can't become the major party. It has a lot of, there are a lot of reasons why that can't be the case. So instead, what they're trying to do is to dominate national and to become, for ACT's ideology to be national's agenda,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's
And
the
there are a
purpose
bunch
of
of people
it.
in National for whom that is already the case, right? Like Nicola Willis
Yes, of
the
course.
same is from the same crowd as David Seymour, essentially. She's was the New Zealand Initiative for years, right? Like she has directly hired New Zealand Initiative hacks to be part of the government advisory boards and etc.
Banging the table, Atlas, Atlas,
Yeah, I mean,
Atlas.
right? Like it's pretty funny to see that picked up finally. But I mean, good.
Uh, oh, you mean the conspiracy theory,
Oh
as
yeah,
the all the
conspiracy theory. Yeah.
reasonable political accounts are saying?
Yeah, yeah. So we're failing at school lunches. They're also failing on health. Simeon Brown has moved into the health minister role, taking over from Shane Reddy. The first thing he's doing the first major change he's making is to get rid of Lester Levy, who is put in to do all the cuts because he's failed at least on the face of it. I mean, really, he hasn't failed because he's destroyed the health system, which was the entire point. And now
Mm.
Simeon Brown is saying, "Oh, we're going to get rid of him. We're doing a 90-day turnaround plan now." That is what Lester Levy was brought in to do in the first place. And we're going to have to do private partnerships, right? We're going to have to like work with private companies to deliver. It's it's so barefaced, and it has been the entire time. And we still haven't had sufficient investigative reporting on how this government is just intentionally driving down health outcomes, i.e., killing people so that they can do a privatization pipeline and essentially destroy the New Zealand health system forever and bring it to a US model, which we've all seen the stories, if not experienced ourselves, just how horrific the US system is.
I think there should be a full episode on what that means. What does the US system do? What are its implications? Because it might be good to have an explainer for people about how, on every level, it's worse for almost everybody except for shareholders and insurance companies. That's about it. And it's so bad that I think it's self-evident on the face that it's caused at least one slaying, right? As a kind of redress against that. Or as a kind of act out against the cruelty that it enacts. But I think a lot of New Zealanders don't really comprehend because we've lived with the National Health Service, albeit one that's been cut at and kind of partially privatized since the 90s, since Bill English was health minister. And I think, and has personally enriched himself off that, by the way. But I think it might be worth really delving into all of the different levels on which it affects it, because I think people can't really comprehend. And not necessarily saying the people that are the audience of this program, but I think at least if those people are able to explain to co-workers, no, you don't understand. Like, you think it's going to just be like, oh yeah, maybe this will get a bit different. Like, you need to know, you need to understand, because this is like the problem of talking about, prior to the kind of acute phase of the genocide in Gaza, which was seen, rather than the kind of slow genocide since Israel was set up, right, since the Nakba. I think the hardest thing about talking about Palestine with people, or in particular Gaza, like leaving aside the West Bank, was that if you told people a few basic facts about the literal conditions in which people lived there, they would just not believe you because that would be too unfair to exist in this world, right? It was really hard to talk to people about it. They'd say, oh, you must be reading some kind of biased conspiracy news source or something. And you go, no, like, these are UN reports. Like, Harvard professor Sarah Roy has written a book about, the water quality prior to 2020. Like, if you tried to talk to people about this, they just, like, how it was undrinkable, about any of the economic conditions, about anything about that open air concentration camp, you just couldn't, right? Or it was very difficult. And I think that this is the same here, that people don't understand the horrors that will be coming if it is privatized. And that is what National wants to do, because this should be something that is a career ender for anybody in the party of government that attempts it. Our National Health Service and having it is immensely popular. People don't like that you have to wait around. They don't like how bad the emergency rooms are. That, if they knew how much worse it would get, they would,
And this is why the media
nothing, right?
are a key partner.
And can't be honest about it.
It's
It's impossible
actually,
for them to be honest about
yeah,
it.
and it's a dereliction of duty. Like, there is no fourth estate in New Zealand. I'm
You
sorry.
can't be a good person. Look, let me illustrate just one small part. You can't be a good person within that sort of system because of the different forces pulling at you, right? Like, you might want to do provision of health, but actually what you have to do is to try to balance that against something which it can't be balanced against profit taking, against the balance of risk. So to give an example, I was talking to I won't say the particular type of, but somebody in the psychiatry sphere who is relatively prominent and certainly has a CV as long as your arm, having done like quite substantial roles in different places around the world. And at one point, she had worked as a director of a hospital which involved, that side of mental health care and physical care, right? And so there was that, tussle between the kind of behavioral sort of approach to it and the physical approach to it, which is seeing, the mind is just like a series of levers to pull out, which is kind of in some ways the way that doctors think about it because of their training. But the biggest difficulty that she talked about was that when they first started doing what they were doing, they had a lot more freedom. But as you operate, everything becomes a precedent because the concern is risk, the concern is being sued and taught, and the concern is that it may cut against profits, or there may be some issue with the business. And so as the years go on, that net draws tighter and tighter around you. And unfortunately, there is a situation where you have to develop internal policy where ordinarily at the start, you could have been discretionary about the intake of somebody into your system and cared for them properly and made some kind of decisions to shift around funding and so on and so forth, or to give them that, or to negotiate with the insurance company. And instead, by the end, it's like, no, you just have to deny a whole lot of people after several years, even if you start out with good intentions, just because of the way the net draws itself around tight, because business people and stakeholders always want to make sure that their coffers are overflowing and that the income streams keep coming. This is always going to be a problem with it, no matter how good your intentions are, because the profit motive shouldn't exist in human healthcare.
And that's what it comes down to with a whole range of stuff as well. This is not just like a health care issue or a health system issue. We're seeing this right across the board in public services. And we're going to see this kind of stuff happening, in education is happening right now as well, in infrastructure with public-private partnerships, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I guess final thing, lighter note to cap off the episode. Phil Goff said, or asked a rhetorical question, I think. Does Trump even know much about history or something similar? And Winston Peters immediately turned around and fired him as High Commissioner to the UK. That's pretty funny.
Yeah, it's not out of bounds if you have a diplomatic position. I'm going to pull the centrist analysis sort of thing. This isn't something ridiculous or unheard of, but it is really funny that that's the thing that got Winston Peters' goat. It's also really funny that Goff was at Chatham House, but the event wasn't under Chatham House rules, and so he fucked himself.
You idiot, Phil Goff. I mean,
he was like, "Oh, it's at Chatham House. It's got to be anonymous." No, it's on video, buddy. Your face is there asking the question.
The funniest thing about this for me is that Trump would agree with Phil Goff. Trump would revel in the fact, that he's an anti-intellectual.
Yeah, we don't need history. We're making history, folks. Blah blah blah.
Yeah. But I think the thing for me that is a little bit worrying about this is just how quick it was, how much of a itchy trigger finger our politicians have for not stepping on Trump's toes. That's worrying to me. And then to see political reporters like Luke Malpass, who's a neoliberal plant and shill, by the way, basically doing a pro-fascism explainer article about it, saying, "Oh, we can't really afford to upset the Trump White House, so we just kind of have to roll over for everything they do."
What did we say?
He's a chief political correspondent for.
What did we say? 1
to
2 episodes again. Less than T-minus 5 years at most before reporters are doing it, and already, right?
Yeah,
dipping the toes.
Just foul. Fuck, speaking truth to power. This is so far removed from that at this point. Oh, we can't even make a little quip. We can't even make a quip that Donald Trump himself might actively agree with, in case we get a little tariff on us. Oh, they might bomb us. And God, if that's a chief correspondent, how much of this rot is just rife throughout our media organizations? How many jumped up little fascists, because that is what this kind of behavior entails, out there tapping their keyboards, trying to ease the route for fascism to enter New Zealand? And the number is a lot higher than I want it to be. And we've said it before, the largest constituency on percentage for the ACT Party is probably people in media. And that should be a reason to shut the whole fucking thing down, honestly.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I got nothing more to say about this. I just think he's off and he's off. It's really funny. It's I am sympathetic. I think that I think it was the wrong thing to do to fire him. I think perhaps he could have been told to pull your head in, which is actually what Helen Clark said that should have been done. if you're a diplomat, you're not really supposed to act as a politician, but it is just a kind of an interesting situation. It's interesting that Winston Peters does have that knee-jerk response to it, because I think it drew attention to it when it almost certainly would never have gained any sort of attention whatsoever if they had been tipped off about it. I'm sure like Trump wouldn't have even have heard about it.
Well,
And
here's the
certainly
other
hasn't
thing.
heard about it now, but like you're increasing the chances that somebody will actually care or in some sense do that, right?
Well, and also it would have, if you really wanted to suck Donald Trump off, just wait for Donald Trump to make a big fuss about it and be like, "Oh, yes, sir, right away, sir," and do it in response to him instead of jumping the gun before he's even noticed it, right?
Do the Claudia Scheinbaum thing and just be like, "Yep, yes, sir. We're getting rid of our high commissioner. We're replacing him with a man named Phil Goff." Like, he's not gonna know. You can play this man all day as long as you say you're the greatest. It's amazing the deals that you create out of the deal, sir. Here's the thing that we wanted to do. That's your idea. Like,
It's pretty easy, folks.
it's so easy to play this man. What's wrong with them that they can't do it?
They're just like little toadies, and they've got toady brain, and they want to toad about. Is what it comes down to. They love the taste of boot, Simone. They love it so much.
This is my impression of a New Zealand reporter. Mitch, can you put a Foley sound of like typewritering over this? That's it. That's it. That's the tweet.
It's going to be funnier when we're not going to put a follow sound over it, but we are going to have the direction.
That's going to be very funny. No, you have to do it. It's going to sound really stupid.
Well, good luck. Good luck.
You wouldn't make me sound stupid, would you, Mitch?
Well, yeah, it's all looking pretty bad. That's all I've got to say. Please, unions, force labor to not be shit. Labor Party, fire your entire polling consultancy or whoever the fuck you're using to come up with your PR lines and hire me. I'll be much cheaper and I will be 1,000% better. I don't care. I will sell myself out just for you to have better fucking PR. I don't give a shit.
I'm just thinking about all the other firings, like Adrian Orgon, like, who do you reckon next head of the Reserve Bank? Don Brash again? Hobson's pledge.
Yeah, Richard Preble gone from the Waitangi Tribunal.
Richard Preble,
that was short-lived.
Richard Preble has just become free. He's just gone off the Waitangi Tribunal.
Time for
he could be head of the Reserve Bank.
Yeah, beautiful.
Why was he ever in the Waitangi Tribunal? I would like to know this. What possible expertise could he bring?
Just to fuck things up. He's just there to fuck things up. Yeah, that's it. No, the one that we've been thinking about for the Reserve Bank is like NZI guy from the New Zealand Initiative going to come in. We'll see how we go. If that happens, I'm just going to put it out there now. If they hire an ex Business Roundtable and New Zealand Initiative, the same organization, but whichever person to be the head of the Reserve Bank, that means without a doubt that Nicola Willis and others within the National Party are just fully entryists into New Zealand politics. That will be so far gone. The NZI, New Zealand Initiative, are incredibly radical. It's really hard to underline how much that is the case. So if they were to do this, it would be like Javier Milei kind of coming in.
It's sort of a Mont Pelerin Society of New Zealand, if you think about it. Although not necessarily just of New Zealand, like New Zealand Initiative, there are those, as we say, those links to overseas interests, right?
Yeah. It's going to be some wild shit. Anyway, that's been another episode of 10200. Thank you, Simone, for joining me.
Thank you. I'm going to go to the toilet.
Wonderful.
We love to hear that on a Monday morning whenever you're listening to this on the way to work.
Yeah. And enjoy packing up your house.
Thank you. I'll be in Auckland soon, people.
Fantastic. Like, share, subscribe. And we'll be back for current events next week as well. See you later.
If artificers are denied, living a pointless life, but learning all your lessons. Fucking politics, there's no distinction. The road's upon now. It's paved with good intentions. And I'll admit that I'm at a loss for what to say. When they quote this as a cost, we ought to stay. 'Cause I live amongst the people every day. This vindictive, forgetful fucking rain. It feels like we're